Welcome back to the Backwards History Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Will, here with my co-host, Kevin. Say hi, Kevin.
Hi, Kevin.
Shut up, Kevin.
I'm going to go with no.
All right. Well, we weren't initially going to do this episode, but after last week and all of the uproar over Columbus Day and quote-unquote Indigenous Peoples Day, we figured that the podcast, whose goal is to battle misinformation, miseducation, and all-around willful ignorance...
It was our duty to step in.
Exactly. So, I guess you can kind of tell that our goal today is to talk about Columbus Day and its true origins. But before we get started, we want to make sure to tell you to like, share, subscribe, and let everybody else know that may like our podcast to come give us a look.
Spread the word.
Spread it like warm butter
There you go.
on some toasted bread. All right, Kevin, go ahead.
That's right. As Will alluded to a moment ago, we originally had decided against it because Columbus Day was one of those holidays that's really just an excuse not to go to work.
I like those days.
Those are good.
But I've never worked anywhere that actually let me off for Columbus Day.
Me neither. After I got out of school, it was, it's Monday, go to work. But we originally didn't want to do this episode because we didn't feel it would really reach an audience that needed to hear it, because I incorrectly assumed people knew about Columbus Day. But after seeing all the negativity of just the wrong on social media and on TV shows and everywhere.
Might you call it, willful ignorance?
That's what it seemed like to me.
Or misinformation and miseducation?
There was definitely some miseducation and misinformation going on. So if you think back to elementary school, we're all taught that in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. It's true, in 1492, he did sail the ocean, which is blue. But after that, you don't really get a lot of information.
But that's also misinformation because it's not entirely blue everywhere.
True. So, here we go. So as the story goes, Columbus is originally Italian from Genoa, Italy. And he wants to find a shorter route to India and the Asia continent to find more spices, which at this time is an incredibly prosperous business and industry in Europe.
You couldn't just go down to the store down the street and grab you a thing of, salt.
Right. So you had to, the only way you could really get these spices was the overland route, which was known as the Silk Road, which took months and months to cross from China into the European continent. And you had to go over mountains, valleys, rivers, that whole thing. So Columbus is like, and at this time, many educated people knew that the world is round. That's another part of the story that gets added in, that everyone thought the world was flat. We've known the world is round since the Greeks. They proved it mathematically, and then Magellan in the 1500s proved it physically by sailing around the world.
No, we live in a dome, Kevin. It's a flat Earth. I'm kidding. I don't actually believe that.
Now, I'm not really one to attack people's personal beliefs, but the fact that the flat Earth thing is growing is just a testament to the fact that our education system is failing. And I just want to, in case you were wondering, we know the Earth is round. Anyway, so he sets sail. He leaves the Canary Islands, which is right off the coast of Africa, off northern Africa. And for 5 weeks, him and his men on the 3 ships, they're just sailing, and they're starting to get worried. And anyway, after 5 weeks at sea, they finally spot land. And everybody's super excited because, as I said, they'd been on the water for a month and a half.
Land ho!
There you go. He lands in what's present-day San Salvador, and this is the point in history where this is the start of the Age of Discovery. Because Columbus goes back and tells everybody, hey, I found all this land over here. Let's go check it out. Now, if you listen to our earlier podcast, you know that Columbus was not the first European to make it to North America. Well, actually, Columbus never made it to North America, but in 1001 AD, the Viking Leif Erikson actually made it into what is present-day Canada.
Leaf, like from a tree.
Yes, what he said. So the Europeans had made it to the New World prior to this. So Columbus follows back. The only thing is he goes back and tells everybody, so everybody's like, hey, let me go over there and see what I can find. And this starts the age of discovery because now everybody with a boat is sailing across the Atlantic. And slowly and surely they start to colonize the land which people had already, inhabited. So you fast forward 500 years. And as we mentioned in another episode, people these days have a really, really negative, bad tendency to look back on the past through 21st century lenses. They look at the past not as the people during that time would have seen things, but how they look at it, with all their modern day experiences and technologies and beliefs. And yes, while I would never excuse Columbus's actions of killing Native Americans, enslaving them, and taking their property, Columbus Day is actually more of a celebration of the fact that he began the Columbian Exchange. Now we have goods and people and all these raw materials going back and forth all over the world. And that's what starts, we have this big world is unified now. The world got a lot smaller after Columbus.
But when they came to the United States, they intentionally infected the indigenous people with pathogens and things like that. Really? You really think that people had that good of a knowledge of biology to know, oh, these people are not immune to these things, let's infect them? We barely understand that stuff now.
Right. And that's what we, in historiography, is where we study how people view historical events over long periods of time. And unfortunately, today, a lot of people have fallen victim to what historians refer to as the black rumor, which is intentional misinformation being distributed and written about so much, so often, and so widespread that people start to accept it as fact. Unfortunately, when the Europeans first made contact, they brought with them diseases the natives were not immune to. And some estimates put it as high as 90% of the population succumb to these diseases. This was completely unintentional. It's not until the 1800s that doctors and physicians start to understand bacteria, viruses, how things are transmitted. And the diseases spread faster than the colonists do. So while the colonists are pushing inland, they're starting to find there's less and less people because they've already succumbed to the diseases that beat them there, 50 to 100 years prior. But that gets associated with this huge drop in population as the Spanish intentionally done this. When in fact, while they weren't the greatest of visitors by any means, a lot of the death was unintentional due to lack of immunity.
Now, granted, like Kevin said, they weren't exactly the best visitors.
Oh, no.
The one instance I can think of is like the Mayans.
Mm-hmm.
They saw their gods as beings with shiny skin and had sticks that spout fire. Think about what a Spaniard would look like in that time period. They would have had metal armor and early flintlock rifles.
Right, very early. Technological edge.
So, shiny skin and sticks that spout fire. So, oh my God, it's our gods. There's these people who showed up on these
giant canoes,
these boats driven by clouds, sails.
Right.
And they rode up on our seas on horses,
And again, if you listen to our previous episode, horses aren't native to the Americas. So you see these new creatures being reintroduced to a population that has no idea what they are. You see these big monstrous animals and some dudes riding on the back of it.
With this gleaming armor and this boomstick.
Right. Technology they couldn't quite comprehend at the time.
Magic.
And, the disease gives them, the Spanish, an edge because now the population gets crippled by disease and the numbers start to fall very, very quickly, quite dramatically. And that's how the Spanish were able to really colonize so quickly and so effectively. And this is the problem we have with the American education system now. We're going to teach what's popular, not what's confirmed and what's not factually true.
What I like to call the American indoctrination system.
Exactly. Especially when it comes to U.S. history. The education system wants to train you to be a good patriot and to idolize and deify certain individuals in history, not see them as the people they were and try to cover up the flaws they had.
But it feels like it's changed over time, because when we were in school, Columbus was seen as discovering America and blah, 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 blah. And now, in a more, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it, a liberally led education system, it's, Columbus bad. Columbus bad. Just like Orange Man bad,
Right.
You're taught to believe this and only this because this is the lie that's told over and over and over.
Right, and that's the problem because the truth gets lost. You don't get to see the man as he was with his accomplishments, his faults, his failures. You don't get to see the person. You just get the story.
And it seems like even the textbooks are written in a 21st century lens.
A lot of them are. The book I've cited on here many times, as my teacher told me, dedicates an entire chapter to the process of how history books are written so they can be better suited for sale. Instead of just having the information that's needed, we're going to try to craft this book for a particular school district to try to ensure the most sale for this book.
Yeah, that just irritates the mess out of me. Like, if you go back to some of our earlier podcasts, you'll hear me apologizing for the background noise of my 1-year-old, who is now nearly 2, and I have another one on the way.
Congrats.
Thank you. But it makes me think quite often about the possibility of school in the coming years.
Let's get in there.
Do I want her to go to public school like I did? Do I want to pay for private school, which can be exorbitantly expensive?
Oh, yeah. And their standards aren't much better.
But I can tailor the school to what I prefer her to learn or him to learn with the new baby. Or do I want to work in such a way that I can homeschool or my wife can homeschool?
Right. It does make you start to question the public school system, and once you start to see the pitfalls and the shortcomings, and then you start to worry more so when you do become a parent of, what's best for my child so they can become a well-informed adult and not get caught up in these trendy ways of viewing history and everybody, I'm so offended by what happened 500 years ago. I feel so sorry for these people, which you don't even know.
Or I feel like I need reparations for something that happened several hundred years ago or 100 years ago.
Over 150, yeah.
150, yeah. So we're not to a couple hundred. We're still at 100 and some.
When studying history, the most important thing you can do is take your emotion out of it, which can be very difficult to do. I mean, it's something I've struggled with too, especially when you study World War II history and you study about the atrocities committed by the Nazis during the Holocaust. It's really hard not to feel angry towards that group of people and the German people. But you have to understand this happened in the past, and it's important to learn from it so it doesn't happen again.
But we don't learn. If we don't learn the true path of history,
we're doomed to repeat it.
We're doomed to make that loop and go right back down the same path. And that's a very dangerous game that our government is playing by pushing these incomplete or completely erroneous accounts of history in our textbooks and then requiring teachers to teach them.
It's true. And it gets to the point of, your students are taught how to pass a test, and they're not taught how to think critically, how to think for themselves in many instances, and how to approach a problem logically. They're taught, well, this is the answer to this question, this is the answer to that question. I just have to take it as face value because the teacher said it was. And,
Because if I don't pass this test, I don't pass this grade.
Right.
Regardless of what I do in class itself, the standardized test is what matters.
Exactly. And that's what we teach the last few generations is, well, you got to pass this test. This is what you only need to study this material because this is what's on the test. So we're going to fast track the course so you can pass this test.
One of the things that in my lifetime, as far as the tests are concerned, that I feel that is such a blatant slap in the face of American parents and disjustice to the American kids, or us, people our age are the first ones to be affected by it, was No Child Left Behind.
Oh, God. That monster.
Well, think about it. It's No Child Left Behind, but how many people have been left behind in their all-around education because of that program? That's the one that pushed more standardized tests than what we already had.
Right. And then tied public school funding directly with test results.
It's garbage.
That's a whole nother episode.
It's authoritarian garbage.
It is monstrously unjust.
Obviously, we're hosting a history podcast.
Right.
When I took the U.S. history standardized test, I scored extremely high, especially compared to my classmates, without a lot of effort at all.
Right. It's one of those you just have to study for the test.
I didn't have to study for the test. That's the thing. That's what I'm saying. But everyone else had to really pay attention to what our teacher was telling us to do exactly what she said to do on that test. And I was one of the kids that she didn't really bother in her class because she got after the first few weeks that I knew history because that was my thing.
Right.
But I remember one exercise that we did where she had the stereotypical, map of the world on the wall. Mm-hmm. And she would call one person up at the time and would ask them, to point out particular continents and countries and things like that. And it really surprised me how bad my classmates were. Because we were, juniors or seniors in high school. I can't remember which. Because I think we had like a geography test and like a U.S. history test or something of that nature, or world history and then a U.S. history test. But it really, really surprised me. Like, I remember vividly someone being told to point out, Europe, and they pointed to South America.
Oh, fail.
So I don't feel like it did anybody justice to just prepare them for that test because it was blatantly obvious that they needed way more than what the scope of that test could provide. And you cannot just hand out a test and say, okay, this is good for everyone.
Right.
If you're going to do a test, it's got to be tailored per school. Mm-hmm. And even then, it's still not going to do any good for anybody at that point. Because then you're also assuming that everybody in that school is the same, which we know is not true.
And that brings me to a point I like to make, kind of getting back to Columbus Day. One thing I do agree with all the people who seem to get really offended at Columbus Day is they call for an Indigenous Peoples Day, which I think would be, a great idea on two conditions. One, I wouldn't pick Columbus Day to celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day. I'd find a day that was more closely associated with an important historical event in their culture or their or for their people. I wouldn't pick the one day where everything kind of went bad.
And then you would have to have multiple days because there's multiple Indigenous people.
And that's my second point is Indigenous people is one of those nice little clean terms where we like to put things in boxes and label people and everything, and everybody's got a label and everybody knows what this is and that is. There are so many distinct cultures with their own histories native to the Americas that an Indigenous Peoples Day would lose a lot of that.
Isn't it interesting that the group that's pushing an Indigenous Peoples Day is also the same group that says, don't label me. Don't label me, but they want to label.
That is very ironic.
They're the ones throwing out all the labels while preaching, don't label me.
Right. And it's the downfall of, I'm going to look at history from a modern perspective. And you lose so much when you do that. And you take off the rose-colored glasses, and you got to be a lot more objective when studying history.
Right. And it always helps when, you've got these two guys that come on a podcast every week that want to help you
Exactly.
see things in a different lens. Want to encourage you to do your own research, form your own opinions, and as always, trust
but verify.